Do you feel as if you don't belong? Do you know you were meant for something more? Well, you were. Knowledge of who you are and where you really are from is within your reach. Join Janet Carey Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin as they search for the answers as they open up the Stargate to the cosmos.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Stargate to the Cosmos, and I'm your host, Janet Carey Lessin, and my co-host is Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer is Deborah DeFranco, and you're listening to Revolution Radio on Studio B. And our guest today is Thomas J. Carey, who is a native Philadelphian. I'm from Pittsburgh, Thomas. And he holds degrees from Temple University. He has a BS in Business Administration and California State University, Sacramento. He has an MA in Anthropology, and he attended the University of Toronto's Ph.D. program in Anthropology. So he and Dr. Lessin have that in common. I have Sasha has a UCLA Ph.D. in Anthropology. So he's an Air Force veteran. He held a top secret crypto clearance. I don't know what that is, but a top secret crypto clearance. And he's now retired. He's been a Mutual UFO Network State Section Director for Southeastern Pennsylvania from 1986 to 2001. He's a Special Investigator for the J. Hynek Center for UFO Studies from 91 to 2001, and a member of the CUFOS Board of Directors from 97 to 2001. But what we're going to talk about today is his many, many books. He began investigating aspects of the Roswell Incident in 1991 for the Roswell investigative team of Kevin Randle and Don Schmitt, and since 98 has teamed exclusively with Don Schmitt to continue a proactive investigation of the case. So we will go into this in depth. Before we start, Sasha, what would you like to say about today's show? And Tom?
Well, just meditating on the synchronicity of everything. You notice our show was started in by a commercial about how Dirty Dog McKee met his death on a lone highway, and I'm hoping that Tom is going to give us some insight into that.
Welcome to the show, Tom. Thanks for joining us today.
Nice to be with both of you. My pleasure.
Yeah, we're excited to hear all about you have, how many books you have? 6, 7, 8 or something like that, going back?
7. We have 7 out there.
Books. Right. So you have a couple new ones. Tell us a little bit more about your background, and then tell us, we're gonna tarry with you as you kind of take us on a journey through your life and how you got to this point and the books you're investigating. Take it away.
It's been some journey, I'll tell you that. Never thought that I would be a writer growing up. I never worked so hard to get a C in English composition at Temple University. You had to work hard to get that. But no, I was mostly into sports growing up, baseball, football, and basketball. And I thought, well, geez, I love sports so much that I would have one of them as a profession. And I did get several Major League Baseball offers from the St. Louis Cardinals, the Milwaukee Braves, they were in Milwaukee at the time, Pittsburgh Pirates, and Minnesota Twins. But I turned them all down because at the time I was attending Temple University on a full scholarship to play baseball. And my father said, no, you can always get sign the contract, but you got to finish your education. So when I finished my 4 years, it turned out that my senior year at Temple, I got really sick before my senior year. I had tonsillitis. I had my tonsils out, and I got really sick, and I lost 40 pounds right before the baseball season started. And I actually didn't recover my full faculties for a good year and a half after that. So when I was done at Temple, the baseball phone did not ring. So I said, okay, that sort of is over. And so I joined the Air Force to start a new life without sports. I was always, sports sort of was my life growing up. But I said, okay, that's going to be all over. And I joined the Air Force, had a top secret crypto clearance, and was in the Air Force for 4 years.
So what does that mean, a top secret crypto clearance?
What's
so
crypto?
You're telling us that the Air Force is recognizing crypto? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, crypto had to do with, at least in my situation, had to do with the encryption of messages that were being sent from base to base. And so they had to be encrypted from the sending base and decrypted from the receiving base. So my job was to take care of the machine that actually did that. So that you.
I was thinking of the crypto monsters and stuff. Cryptoids. Sorry, my bad.
This was
That's the way they broke the thing about the where the German boats were with the first computer. The guy that made the first computer.
Right.
The same job.
Very important job you had.
Yes. And it was very complicated. And so I was in what they call tech school for about a year, learning how to do that. And my first assignment, I wanted to see Europe, so I requested that a station in Europe, and they sent me to remote Alaska. So I was
That's
up in yes, so I was up in remote Alaska for a year. And by that time, coming out of a remote situation, you're pretty much supposed to get your base of choice. So I wanted to be stationed at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey because it was near my home in Philadelphia. So they sent me to McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento, California. So it turned out to be a good thing for two reasons. One, I got to attend college off base on my own time, and by that time I had become interested in anthropology. So I attended Sacramento State University, later changed to Cal State Sacramento, and I got a master's degree there in anthropology. Actually, I got a second bachelor's degree in anthropology, and then a master's in anthropology. And I also met my wife of now 52 years, Doreen. So we're still married, but I met my wife Doreen there while I was stationed at McClellan. So I stayed in Sacramento until 1974. And because I had gotten my master's, and by that time I also had two children. We had two kids. And I got a fellowship to the University of Toronto to continue my studies in anthropology. I was in physical anthropology as opposed to, social cultural or archaeology. And so we moved to Toronto for 4 years. Unfortunately, I was a big hockey fan. And in Toronto, we would get 4 hockey games on TV every week. And so I spent too much time watching hockey. My son by that time was already into hockey. And so even though I was there 4 years, I taught classes. I had my own classes. So between the teaching of the classes, preparing for the classes, and the hockey, I did not finish my requirements for the degree. And I also, in retrospect, I was overcome by a fear of failure. I don't know if you have ever had that fear of failure, but at some point,
I have.
yeah, at some
No,
point,
Sasha.
the fear of failure overcame me, and I used the hockey as a crutch. I would say, oh, I watched so many, but I think it was the fear of failure that I watched so many hockey games, and plus I did have, I got a teaching fellowship to teach classes, because I had to pay for your domicile and food and all that sort of stuff. So I came up short in my degree, but I don't regret having gone that far. My older brother is a professor emeritus of organic chemistry at the University of Virginia, and his textbooks are still used all over the world for organic chemistry. So I had a real good role model to follow. But like I said, growing up, sports was my number one thing. I still like sports, but physical anthropology, mostly early hominid, early human evolution was my thing. Primate paleontology, that sort of thing. So, but I don't regret that. It was great for me. I learned a lot. I am, still have in the back of my mind completing my degree requirements before I check out, just to have it done. But
Have it done.
yeah.
How did you get interested in UFOs? Have you ever?
Yeah, I was just getting to that.
Go ahead.
I was just getting to that. So where does the UFO equation come in here? Well, when I was a kid, a preteen, I remember my older brother, he was 3 years older than I am, and he read things like newspapers. I was out playing roughhouse. He was reading newspapers. And one day he said, "Hey, Tom, listen to this story." And it was the alleged crash of a UFO. And he said it was near Aztec, New Mexico. I said, "Oh, you mean Mexico?" Because by that time I knew that, the Aztecs were from Mexico. I said, "Oh, you must mean Mexico." He said, "New Mexico." And I said, "What's a flying saucer? What's a flying?" He says, "Well, that's a device that alleged people from another planet came and crashed." I said, "You mean there's people on other planets?" And he says, "Well, that's what this article is saying." So I'm a preteen, but I'm like 7 years old at this point. I said, "Oh my God, what is that?" So when I became a teenager.
Wait a minute, Tom, what year did he read this article to you?
It was 1948.
48, okay,
Yes.
Cool.
Yes, it was 1948. I still remember. He forgets it because I try to remind him about it. He says, "No, I don't remember that." But I remember it distinctly because of the Aztec. He was saying Aztec. And I was saying, no, you must mean Mexico, not New Mexico. He said, no, it says Aztec, Mexico. And so that was actually the Aztec case. That wasn't Roswell. But when I became a teenager, my brother belonged to something called the Science Fiction Book Club. See, he read a lot, things I didn't do at that time.
Right.
And he belonged to something called the Science Fiction Book Club, where they would give you a monthly selection, and say, this is our selection for the month. And
I joined that while I was through.
My phone never rings until I'm doing the. Okay, I turned my phone off. So
I just turned off mine too.
So the book of the month, this one book, and it was 1956. I remember the year. 1956 was something called the Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. It's called the Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by a guy named Captain Edward Ruppelt. And Ruppelt was the former head of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's Project Blue Book in Dayton, Ohio. So that book sat around the house, I would say, for 6 months. I can still see it there sitting on our living room coffee table. And finally I said, well, I'm going to read that book. I'm going to read that book. And the book blew me away because it was by, the former head of Project Blue Book. And he's talking about flying saucers, now called UFOs. And the book was really interesting. And I'm thinking, my God, this guy's got all these stories about these things flying around the sky faster than any of our fastest jets. And they don't know, and they got a whole project trying to find out what it is, and nobody can seem to come up with anything. And that book stuck with me as far as interest in life elsewhere in the universe. So that's 1956. So I looked around for other books about UFOs, and the main advocate for the subject of UFOs at that time was a fellow by the name of Major. Oh my goodness. I just lost his name. Major
Bob Dean.
Kehoe. Major.
Yeah, Kehoe.
Kehoe. I can't remember his first name. Robert. James Key. Something Kehoe. And his books were excellent. He could write, and he's talking about this case and that. Donald E. Kehoe, that's it. Donald E. Kehoe. He was the big guy back then in the 50s and early 60s. And these books were so interesting to me. And the thing about Kehoe, though, is he would not go near. Now, this is in retrospect, because at the time I only knew what he was writing about. I didn't know anything about crash saucers other than that case my brother was talking about. But Kehoe stayed away from crash saucer stories because he felt it was a bridge too far to go for him at the time, because he was trying to convince the Congress to hold hearings. He was trying to get public support for the whole subject of UFOs. So he stayed away from crash saucer stories. And also in the 50s was the advent of these so-called contactee people, the people that claim to, they're our space brothers. They took me on a trip around the solar system. I just got back from Venus, or I just got back from Saturn. I'm thinking, oh my God, who are these people? But those contactees from the mid 1950s, still they ruined it for everybody else, because they still their influence still carries to today, because a lot of people still say, oh, that's, they're wackos that are interested in UFOs. It all gets back to the contactees. And, they used to have these big conventions out in California, Giant Rock and stuff like that. And, but they all had the same message that, our space brothers were trying to save us from ourselves. All that sort of stuff. Well, I wasn't interested in any of that stuff. And, so I'm, going along, and I'm, I got my bachelor's degree, and I'm in the Air Force. And, so I leave California to go to Toronto, and I joined, I joined the local, UFO group there. It was called CUFON, the Canadian UFO Research Network. It was a local Toronto MUFON type organization. So I said, well, I'm still interested. I'm going for my doctorate in anthropology, but I'm still interested in UFOs. And, so I joined. So while I was a member there for about 3 years. Who visits us one day but a guy named William Moore. And he was writing a book about this Philadelphia experiment at the time. This is like 1976 and 75, 76, somewhere in there. And he stopped by CUFON and we interviewed him. He says, well, I'm writing a book about the Philadelphia experiment whereby a American warship was rendered invisible and, so it couldn't be tracked on radar. And the experiment went wrong and some of the seamen became interdimensional. Others became stuck in parts of the ship. It was a crazy story. But he also said he was working, this is 1976, so he hadn't gotten involved in Roswell yet. But so we met William Moore and he went on his way and we told him what we could tell. We listened. And so long about 1978, 79, it had to be 78 because I left Toronto in 78. One of the members of the hierarchy of CUFON said, there's a book coming out on Roswell. I said, oh, you must mean Roseville, because I remember when we lived in California, there was a city close by Sacramento called Roseville. And I said, oh, you must mean Roseville, California. He said, no, Roswell, New Mexico. So I said, oh, what is it about? And he said, it's about a crashed UFO. And that's all I knew at the time. So I kept it in the back of my mind, though. And so when I came back to Philadelphia in 1978 with my family, my wife and 2 children, I looked up, this is now 1978, so it took me a good year to get a good job and get settled. And I joined MUFON, became the state section director for the Philadelphia area and its 4 surrounding counties. And, which meant that I did all the investigation of, local sighting reports. And I also held monthly meetings. And that took a lot of my time. And, after a while, it became evident to me that all of the sighting reports I was getting to investigate, they're all what we call lights in the sky. Just light, oh, I saw this light. And it got bright and it got dark and it turned red and it turned green and it darted this way and it darted. And I think, oh my goodness, is this all we got? So I got bored with that. And I got bored with putting on the meetings because, and this is not to disparage any other, because the subject of UFOs spans, everything from crop circles to chemtrails, to crash saucers, to lights in the sky, to you name it. It's a large panoply of different types of activity. Well, by 1991, I had by that time I had read the Roswell Incident book by William Moore, who also wrote the Philadelphia experiment, and Charles Berlitz, who had just finished having a bestseller called The Bermuda Triangle. So Stanton Friedman worked with Moore on the research, but it was felt at the time that Stan was not well known enough. So that's where they got Charles Berlitz to be the co-author. And really all he did was add his name to William Moore's, where Stan and William Moore did the bulk of the research. So I read that book and it blew me away. It blew me away because we're talking about and being a paleontologist type of guy, I was interested in the nuts and bolts of UFOs, nuts and bolts, not the things that dart around in the night sky. So here was a case that had an alleged crash of a physical object And not only that, it had biological remains, claimed crew members, alien crew members. And it also had a cover-up, and it had everything of a good mystery, only it was a real live case. So I said, boy, that was a great, I really liked that book. So at that time, 1991, I joined, besides MUFON, I joined the CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies, the J. Allen Hynek, famous for his swamp gas explanation.
Right.
I just called him Old Swampy, just Old Swampy. And so I joined CUFOS, and lo and behold, they had these two researchers, one named Kevin Randle, the other named Donald Schmitt. They were reopening the investigation of the Roswell case. Now, it had been 10 years since the first and only Roswell book, The Roswell Incident by Berlitz and Moore, came out in 1980. So we're now talking 1990, 91. There hadn't been another Roswell book. So Schmitt and Randall, they decided that they were going to investigate the case to basically do away with it, just sort of confirm the balloon explanation. So they went down to Roswell, spent a week down there, and they interviewed the son of the rancher, Mac Brazel. The son was named Bill Brazel. And they interviewed Walter Haut, the public information officer at the Roswell Army Airfield back in 1947. And they came away, they said, oh my God, this was something really did happen. Because they were going down there thinking, oh, we're just going to dispose of this case. But they interviewed a few people, including the two I just named, and they came away with the belief that there was something really had happened that was not a weather balloon. So they instituted an investigation, and they would write monthly updates in the International UFO Reporter, which was the publication from CUFOS. And I'm reading these things, and I say, oh my goodness, this stuff there's really something to this. And I was already interested in Roswell. But I noticed that one of the legends of the Roswell case was that the crash scene was discovered by a team of archaeologists from the University of Pennsylvania, had stumbled upon the crash saucer and the little bodies. So I called up Kevin Randle, and I said, hey, Kevin, my name is Tom Carey. I'm interested in this case. What have you done about researching the archaeologists? Because I have a background in anthropology and archaeology and physical anthropology, and the University of Pennsylvania is just 30 minutes away from me. What have you done about finding the archaeologists? They said, well, we interviewed one or two people, and they didn't know anything about it. They were from University of New Mexico. And I said, well, what about the University of Pennsylvania? They said, well, we haven't done anything about that. I said, let me have a crack at it. So I went down to the University of Pennsylvania one Saturday in 1991. I had also called William Moore, who co-authored the Roswell Incident. I said, Mr. Moore, your book, you say you interviewed two archaeology professors from the University of Pennsylvania. What were their names? So he gave me their names, and I went down there and I interviewed them individually. And the first one said that he didn't know anything about it. His name was Bernard Wales. And the second one was a guy named John Cotter, Cotter. And he knew all about the case. I said, oh my goodness, this guy knows all about it. And to conclude, he said, well, you know what really crashed? And I think, oh, no, well, you tell me. He said, well, it was a V-2 rocket carrying a chimpanzee. And I'm thinking, oh my God, where is he going with this? Well, he was lying. He knew the case because he was there, but he lied to me about what it was. And so I had also checked in the library. They have this, one of the archaeological publications is called American Archaeologist or American Archaeology, one of the two. And the January issue of every year was a summation of who did what the previous year. So I got the January 1948 issue and looked in there, and lo and behold, they had John Carter in the summer of 1947 moved from his site where he was conducting research in Arizona. He moved his camp from Arizona to Mississippi that summer. Well, I'm thinking, well, geez, maybe he was in the right place at the right time. If he's moving from Mississippi from Arizona to Mississippi, maybe it put him in the right place at the right time. And lo and behold, I found another witness who was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania. She actually had gotten a master's degree in archaeology there. She said that they were doing in the 1970s, they were doing a dig in Pennsylvania. And one of the days there, John Carter stopped by and he told them all about his experience with the Roswell crash. And so I said, I asked her, what was this professor's name? And she says, oh, well, I can't tell you. I said, why not? She said, because he's well known and he's well published. Well, that would be, John, a lot of the archaeologists were, but she gave me his initials as CJ. And CJ, well, what she did is she reversed the sequence. It was really JC, John Carter. And so that's how I got involved in Roswell. Was that I was living in Philadelphia. They hadn't done any work on the archaeologists, and because of my background, I dove in looking for the team of archaeologists that stumbled upon the craft. And it turned out that yes, John Carter was there, and it is because he was changing locations of his camp. But the head guy was a fellow by the name of William Curry Holden from Texas Tech. He headed up the combined department at Texas Tech of Archaeology and History. And he led a team that summer into New Mexico the weekend of the crash. And he led that team. And so Kevin Randle in 1992 interviewed the professor Curry Holden, and by this time Curry Holden's like 94 years old, and all he could say to Kevin was, "Yes, I was there, I saw it all." And Kevin would repeat, "We're talking about the UFO crash from 1947 northwest of Roswell, New Mexico," and he kept repeating, "Yes, I was there, I saw it all." So that was my introduction to the team of Kevin Randle and Don Schmitt. They wrote a book in 1991 called UFO Crash at Roswell, which reopened the case, and it really made Roswell more so than even the first book by William Moore and Berlitz. This book really caught on, and it made Roswell a household name around the world.
What do all these people say was the motive for concealing this?
I'm sorry?
What was the motive of these misinformation agents in concealing the facts?
There were many motives. what we found out over the years was that we got most of our information from people who did not work for the government, for military people who were enlisted men, not officers, and who were not on a military pension. It turned out that the military guys, both enlistees and officers who were retired, say retired Air Force or retired Army, they would not talk to us because they thought it would somehow affect their pensions, because when they left the service and at the time of the crash, they were sworn to secrecy, and they didn't know how long that oath of secrecy lasted. So to play it safe, they just said, "Well, I can't talk to you because I've been sworn to secrecy, and I'm living on a military pension." So they didn't want to take any chances that it would somehow affect their retirement. So
they also signed something that said you have to lie if you're asked about this.
Yes, Stanton Friedman said that they had this thing they had to sign, that you weren't allowed to tell the truth.
Yeah, so they had to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Right.
A lot of them, so they had to sign a non-disclosure, and they didn't know how long that lasted, and so they would not talk to us. But we got most of our information from fellas who were in the Army Air Corps at the time. Even though some of them had signed non-disclosure agreements, they were not employed. They were not on a government or military pension. So those are the people that talk to us. And the higher the rank, the less likely they would talk to us. Like we have a handful of generals who talk to us, but you can count the numbers on one hand. And I have to tell you that as I speak tonight, we have over 600 first and second hand witnesses to the extraterrestrial nature of this crash. Over 600 first and second hand witnesses that we have. And 99% of them did not come forward. We had to find them ourselves. And
wow.
The people who usually, and the other thing we found out was that people who came forward, 99% of the time they were hoaxing or it was a joke or something. And the ones that were legit, we had to find them ourselves. And they always say, wow, how did you find me? And I wish we had the internet sooner, I'll tell you that.
Right.
What did they say about the bodies?
Well, the bodies, they all were, what's interesting is that the people who saw the bodies, they were very consistent with one another. It's not like all 600 got together and said, okay, 60 years from now, Carey and Schmitt are going to come looking for you. And here's what we're going to tell them. That's not what happened. The bodies, they were 3.5 to 4 feet long. The overriding feature was the large pear-shaped head. That was the overriding feature, was the small, slight, slender body, long arms, long fingers, but this overriding large inverted pear-shaped head, a little slit of maybe 1 inch, 1.5 inches for a mouth that didn't go anywhere, slanted eyes, wide set, and the color varied. We figure that the color varied from where the person viewed it and how long it had been dead, because it started changing colors, fairly rapidly after being dead and lying out in the desert for a couple of days. So,
how many fingers did it have?
Huh?
Fingers. How many fingers?
Oh, 4.
4. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and And we never got any number of digits on the toes, but we assumed the toes were 4 as well. But the fingers, it was 4. And
did anybody see any live aliens? Did you?
Yes.
There's a story
Yes.
of. Tell me what.
A number of the witnesses, the first-hand witnesses and second-hand witnesses who were told the story from their parents, they talked about one of them being alive. And this was there were 2 stories that stand out, because a lot of the witnesses who saw the bodies, they would say one was alive. There were 4 dead and 1 alive. But the best stories about the one that was alive comes to us from one of the Roswell City firemen, and the other came to us from a member of the Air Force War College, down in Montgomery, Alabama, where the best and the brightest they would spend a year at the Air War College, and the Roswell fireman, his name was Dan Dwyer, and the day that the crash was discovered north of town, they had sent Jesse Marcel out, the base intelligence officer, and Sharon Cavett, the counterintelligence officer, out on Sunday, July 6th, to follow the rancher out to the debris field site. Well, while they were out there, just north of town, the second site where more of the wreckage was found, and 2 dead ones and 1 live one was found. That was found on the 7th. And this is the day Marcel and Cavett are still out on the debris field site. Well, the archaeologists found this site north of town with 2 dead ones and 1 alive. They phoned it into the sheriff's office and the fire department. So lo and behold, here comes an Air Force colonel from the base, stops by the fire department, said, don't go out to the site. There's been a crash. We'll take care of it. Don't go out to the site. Well, Dan Dwyer says, hell with that. He snuck out there on his own with one of his crew members went out on his own, got out there even before the military got out there in force. And they saw the craft that was crashed, and he saw 2 bodies, and then he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. He said, what is that? And he looked, and here's a creature from another world walking around the site. He says, oh my God, what is this? It's 3.5 feet tall, big head. He never seen anything like it. And he told his family that night, he said, because they wanted to know all about it, he said that he felt sorry for it because, his comrades were dead and the craft was crashed, and they wanted to know, well, did you talk to this creature? And he said, yes, I did. He says, well, we talked to one another not like we're talking, by moving our lips and mouth and tongue and making sounds come out. We talked to one another without moving our lips, but we talked to one another in our heads. Well, that sounds like extra, mental telepathy to me. Mm-hmm. So that's how they talked. And well, what did it say? What did the creature say? Well, he told his family, he said, well, it was interesting. He says, I was really worried about it. And the creature said to him, talking mentally, don't worry yourself about me. My ship has crashed. My comrades are dead, and I'm stranded here without any hope of getting back to where I came from. But I accept my fate. And that was basically all they got.
Wow.
And then the military came up. And kicked everybody, kicked them off the site, sworn to secrecy. And so that was Dan Dwyer. We got that story from Disorder.
Wow, what wisdom.
Tom, I have a question.
Wow.
Have you ever listened to or read the book called Alien Interview by Lawrence Spencer about Matilda, the nurse that was able to telepathic?
I don't want to disparage anybody. Yes, it's a fiction. It's a fiction. I interviewed the author. I said, "This book is a fiction, isn't it?" And he said, "Yes." So there was no nurse by that name. And but reading the book, I said, "This is a fiction." And so I called him up and asked him. I said, "This book is a fiction, right?" And he said, "Yes." So
okay. Anyway, it seems to correlate about the telepathy. That's all. She was able to hear the alien speak telepathically, at least in the book. So, was anybody else able to hear the alien speak telepathically?
The second story we have comes from a Marine lieutenant colonel by the name of Marion Blackmack. That was his nickname, Marion Blackmack Magruder. He was a fighter pilot, night fighter pilot in World War II in the Pacific. And he was chosen in 1947 to attend the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama, Maxwell Air Force Base. They would select like 90 officers every year. The class lasted a year from from June of 47 to May of 48. And he was in the second class since the war was over. So we got this story he had 5 sons, Marion Jr., Mark, Mike, their names all began with M. And I interviewed, some of the sons, and they all said to talk to this one son. So I think it was Mark. And he said that his father kept the secret for years, never told them about this until July 1967 moon landing. Seemed to have a
69.
60. What did I say? 69. Yes.
Yeah, 69.
Yeah. Somehow, and this happened to a number of the witnesses. When the moon landing occurred, they opened up about Roswell. It got them talking. Well, Marion Magruder was one of those who started talking at the time of the moon landing. And so he said, "Well, fellas, I was in that Air War College from 1967 through May of 1968. I'm sorry, 48. Getting my years mixed up. But he said that one day they flew the entire class from Montgomery, Alabama to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And they're thinking, wow, because what they're being trained for is administration and higher office to lead the Air Force into the new post-war era. They chose the best and the brightest, they thought, and to lead the Air Force into the post-war era. And Marion Magruder was one of those. And so they fly them up to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, and they didn't know why they were going because there was no real course material on the schedule. Well, what they did is they took the class into this room. They led them into a room. It was inside a hangar, into a room, and they're standing around, and they say, "Okay, well, this is great. Now, what do we do? Are we going to dance, or what are we going to do?" So they wheel in all of this strange wreckage. It was wreckage from the Roswell crash, and it was they had this type of wreckage, that type of wreckage, And most notably, they had something that we always call the memory metal. And the memory metal was light as a feather, very thin, like thin foil, that you could wad up in your hand, and it felt like you didn't have anything in your hand. And then you would let it go, and it would just unfurl itself and float there. Just float there. It wouldn't drop to the floor.
Float.
I'm sorry?
It would float. Okay. It had,
yes, it would float gently.
It didn't hit the floor at all. It would just float.
It unfurled.
You couldn't cut it. You couldn't scratch it. You couldn't burn it. You couldn't form it or deform it permanently in any way. We call it the memory metal. We also call it our holy grail of Roswell because we're searching for a piece of that. That's what we're missing. But they brought it out for all these air guys, and they say, well, they wanted to know, well, what is this stuff? Where did you get this stuff? And they were told, honestly, they said, well, it came from the crash of a flying saucer last year, which would have been 1947 in New Mexico. So it was the Roswell crash. So they're scratching their head because not everybody had heard of the Roswell crash. And so while they're scratching their head, they're led into another room. And in this room, you've heard of these two-way mirrors where on one side it's a mirror, but on the other side you can see through the glass, right? It's a two-way mirror.
Sure.
So they're looking through the look-see-through side, and inside they see the live one. We'll call it the live one from Roswell. And we don't know if it was sitting down or standing up, doing push-ups, doing the Macarena. We don't know what it was. We don't know what it was doing. But Marion Magruder said he immediately had a mental connection to it. He said, I immediately had a mental connection to it. I didn't talk to it. It didn't talk to me, but I felt great sympathy for it. And I also felt its human qualities rather than, its alien qualities. He felt human qualities towards it and not alien qualities, but they didn't talk to one another, but he had this great sense with it. And, that's all he could remember. And he told his sons, they had that moon landing. So, but other than that, the creature was housed at Wright-Patterson for, we suspect, a number of years. And they did certain experiments, I'll say with it rather than on it. And the word was that it finally died in one of the experiments they were doing with it or on it, around 1952. But you have to figure that you have to figure that somewhere along the line they did talk to it, just like Dan Dwyer did. So, that's all we know about it. We also have a fellow named Leonard Stringfield who really broke open the crashed saucer stories. He lived in Columbus, Ohio, and he had a lot of friends at Dayton, Ohio at Wright-Patterson. And he got a lot of stories about crashed saucer material being at Wright-Patterson, as well as little bodies being there. And, he also had, because they had an aeromedical facility at Wright-Patterson, top of the line, and they did autopsies on the dead creatures. And we have a number of stories from people who actually, not only happened to see the dead bodies in cryogenic suspension, but also Leonard Stringfield had medical people there who were involved in the autopsies. And, they told him, he would write to them and he said, okay, did it look like this? He would draw a picture of it and he would say things about it, and they would write back to him, okay, this is right, that's wrong, this is right, that's wrong. And so finally, at the end, he was able to get a schematic drawing of what the creature looked like or the bodies look like, that was given the imprimatur of the medical people that he knew who took part in the autopsies. And we have a big picture of that in several of our books. And as far as it talked about the large head, it was hairless, and the small slit for a mouth, all that sort of stuff that we already talked about. But Leonard Stringfield, we can thank him for most of that information that he broke, because up until Leonard Stringfield, most researchers, certainly Donald Kehoe, wouldn't go near the crash saucer stories or the tales about the alien beings. People had stories about. He wouldn't go near those, but
we interviewed Clifford Stone. He was with the recovery team, and so
not the Roswell. He was part of other crashes.
Yeah, I know Clifford. Clifford. Very nice. Very nice
music. We're going to be back. I'm sorry, this is the top of the hour. We have a break. We'll be back in 4 minutes.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
The future is uncertain, I know this. Death is inevitable, I know this. But one thing is certain, as free men, it is our right to live unencumbered and in peace. And those times are quickly drawing to an end. And in these times, peace is certainly an illusion, and as the chains grow tighter, our ability to slip those chains increase incrementally with every passing moment. Inaction is no longer an option. It's time to raise our voices like a cacophony of thunder and lightning and tell the masters, no more. And this is Nighthawk, and I say, for myself, no more. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, because the freedom is slipping away.
Hello, my name is Mr. Rowe. I am the host of Reality Extraction, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I utilize logic, intellect, and magic to methodically atomize, vivisect, analyze, examine, study, scrutinize, and extract an essence of reality from a fog of illusion and confusion. You can find me on Studio B every Thursday, 1700 hours Pacific Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. No topic taboo, no subject too strange. I strive to take a neutral standpoint during the dissection of the topic at hand. That's Reality Extraction with Mr. Rowe on Revolution Radio.
Syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week. Yes. But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting. Yes, I see. By a civil majority in the case of purely internal affairs. Be quiet. But by a 2/3 majority in the case of more... Be quiet. I order you to be quiet. Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look. It's just a flesh wound. I don't believe I've seen such a display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, stupidity. I'll do you for that. What? Come here. What are you going to do? Bleed on me? I'm invincible. You're a loony. The Black Knight always triumphs!
Roundtable Live, Monday through Friday, 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your ideas, bring your voice. King Arthur had nothing on us. Here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
Feel that things were not quite right, that everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
download it to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to Stargate to the Cosmos. And I'm your host, Janet Carey Lessin, and I'm here with Dr. Sasha, Alex Lessin. Our producer is Deborah DeFranco. And we're on the second hour with Thomas Carey about Roswell. But before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to the donation button on revolution.radio. Go up to the left-hand tab at the top and make your a one-time donation, or go to the Patreon button and make your recurring donation. And we thank you very much for your donations. So before we get back, what would you like to say, Sash?
Well, so far we've established such clear evidence that there were aliens, that there was one that was alive for several years. The evidence is overwhelming. That's what I got.
All right. Before we get back to the story, I just want to ask you, I asked this of all the researchers, have you ever had any kind of experiences yourself? Did you see lights? Did you see a craft? Did you go on board a ship? There's usually something that inspires you. Besides reading the books, there's usually something that makes people this is kind of the level of obsession. You've written 7 books, right? So I know you got interested, but is there anything even underneath that?
Yes. Nothing like abductions or anything like that, but I have had several sightings. The 2 best ones I had were the first one when I was stationed at McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento, California. It was midday, around noontime. I was going somewhere, but I was waiting for a ride because I didn't have a car at that point. And so I'm standing outside my barracks, sunny day, and I look up above, and here there is this white disc, a circular disc, totally white, about the size if you took a silver dollar and held it at arm's length, and up and right up above. And I'm looking at that, and it's not moving. It's just sitting up there. So I'm thinking, okay, what is this? So someone at that point said, "Hey, Tom, you got a phone call in the day room." So I went inside. I was in there about a minute or less for the phone call, and I came out. It was gone, totally gone. So I figure, if it was some sort of aircraft of ours and it was moving away, I would still see it. Or if it was a balloon that burst, it would be on its way down, and I would see that. But there was nothing. It's there one minute, gone the next, and it was a perfect circle, white, not reflecting the sun or anything. It was its own light source. So that was my first sighting. and the other thing I say, well, it's sitting over this Air Force base. I'm sure they're going to send up a plane to check it out any time now. Well, they never did. So I still don't know what that was. And my last sighting, I had two other ones in between, but my last sighting was I'm flying back from Roswell 2 years ago. They have a festival every July, and Don Schmitt and I have been speakers for 25 years every July. And so I'm flying back to Philadelphia, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm thinking, my goodness, here I am thinking about the Roswell case, and I never see anything. We're flying above the clouds. I never see anything up here. And just then I see one of these, what they call them today, they call them Tic Tacs. It was a fuselage going slower than our airplane, off to the right. That would be the starboard side, I guess. It's about 4 o'clock low on the starboard side, going slower than our plane. It's totally white, no windows, but I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be an aircraft. I'm going to see the wings and tail any minute here, and I never did. There were no wings, no tail, no exhaust, just pacing our plane slower than, and finally it went out of sight to the rear.
How large did it? How big was it? Did it look?
I would say it was the same size as like a large airliner. And, but I thought, at first I thought it was an airliner, but I didn't see any wings, any windows, no exhaust, no tail, no engines, nothing. And I'm thinking, okay, what is this? So it disappeared behind me. So just as we're going into our descent path into Philadelphia International Airport, here it comes head on from the left to right across the bow of our aircraft. And now I don't think that they allow aircraft when you're in your descent mode to cross your path in front. I don't think they allow that, but it went right across from say 8 o'clock low on the left to 2 o'clock high on the right across in front of our aircraft in the descent. So that was definitely an unknown, and I don't know what it was, but those are my two best sightings.
Did anyone else comment upon this, what you saw from the plane?
No, because I'm sitting there, I'm just looking out the window, I'm just transfixed on this thing, and of course I don't know anybody else on the plane, and I'm just looking at this. I'm thinking, okay, what is that? And I'm trying to figure out what it is, because all the while I'm thinking, well, it's got to be another airplane, but it wasn't. And then it was gone. And then the other thing in the descent path, it happened so fast. I was startled that it just went zipped right in front from the lower left to the upper right and in front of our aircraft, and that took like 2 seconds. So,
did you have a fantasy that it was relevant to you in particular?
I didn't think so at the time, but now years later, a couple of years, this happened about 4 years ago, and thinking about it now, I wonder. I
had one in 66 when I was 12 years old. I was coming home, and it was summer around probably August because it had the crickets were going off, and I felt something, and I turned around, and there was a cigar-shaped craft. Looks like the artist renditions of the Betty and Barney Hill craft. The windows, and it was treetop height, and it was pretty good size. And when I looked, there were little creatures in the windows. I couldn't tell the details, but I knew they were humanoid, but they weren't human. And the interesting thing was the crickets stopped making noises, and it's like a shift in dimensions. All the traffic stopped. It was just me and the craft. Like the craft was holding me between time and space.
What do you mean you felt something? What does that mean?
It felt like a temperature drop, like the pressure dropped, like atmospheric pressure drop or something. And then all the crickets stopped, and there's usually traffic on my street. There was zero traffic. We were there about 15 minutes. And then finally I just said, I'm getting tired of going in. Thank you for showing yourself. Because I was looking for a witness. I was hoping something would, car would come. I'd, stop and say, hey, look at this. And obviously they had some kind of control over the whole scene. And when I said I'm leaving, the crickets started up again.
Wow. Was this in Hawaii?
Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh. I lived in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, when I was a child in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, was a hot spot. We were always seeing all kinds of things in the sky. If you go to the drive, back in those days, we went to drive-in. That was part of the fun of the drive-in. Let's just sit there all night and watch all the things that were obviously not planes.
How far were you from 3 Mile Island and the stuff?
That's over, I don't know, an hour.
Far away. Okay.
An hour and a half outside. Yeah.
You mentioned something about feeling alone. That first case I told you about with the disc overhead. Thinking about it now, I was the only one there looking at this. Now, this is an air base. You figure there's a lot of people in an air base, but I'm standing out there. There's nobody else out there that was looking at this thing, and I don't recall anybody else being there. And that's interesting.
Right. It was summer. It was the most perfect weather. I mean, people would be walking their dogs or out on the porch or something, and it was like, they just stopped everything.
Yes.
Bizarre.
Yes, this sighting was the McClellan sighting was 1966 when I was stationed there, and I kept thinking that there's going to be a jet or two launched from the base to go up and look at this thing, what's hanging over their base, and nothing ever happened. So, and
stories about guys that were Air Force guys that were ordered to scramble and take down a bogey, an intruder, and one of them had their loaded, and the spacecraft, whatever it was, took that guy down. Then it buzzed the guy who's off. It was a great interview. I don't know what kind of veracity to give to that stuff, but it seemed that American airmen who were killed trying to defend their base by attacking these craft. Have you heard stuff like that?
No. I don't doubt it. But it's strange the way these things happen. A lot of people feeling that no one else is seeing this, and what's interesting here is that right after World War II, starting in late 1945, we started bringing over what they call the paperclip Germans. The rocket people who developed the German V2 rockets. Werner von Braun and a few of the others. And I interviewed. Of course, von Braun died in the 70s, and the other main guy, Ernst Steinhoff, died in 1989, I believe. Well, I interviewed Steinhoff's sons a couple of years ago, and they said, "Oh well, my father never, even though his father was involved in the UFO research for the Air Force, he was a rocket guy out in Alamogordo, New Mexico, but his father was heavily involved." He said, "Oh, my father never told me anything about Roswell. Never told me anything." And he said, in fact, he said, "Those people who know don't talk, but people who talk don't know," was his big comment. But before we ended the conversation, his son, this was Ralph Steinhoff, his son, said, you know, I'll leave you with this. He says, I believe, and I believe he got this from his father, I believe that what crashed at Roswell was not extraterrestrial, it was extratemporal, meaning that they were time travelers. Now, he had to get that from his father.
Wow. Time traveler.
Yes.
Do you think that's what it was?
I am open to that distinct possibility. I am definitely open to that possibility because I thought about it myself. You know, how do you get from there to here? And with our, you know, the technology we have, it would take 1,000 years. You know, but they must have solved the so-called space-time continuum, where they can bend space and time becomes not a problem. So where they can get here from there by bending space, time travelers. And there was another, who was this? There was another witness, a high level. Oh, this was a high naval officer was involved in UFO research, especially Roswell. His name was George Hoover, commanding officer George Hoover, and he died in the 80s. And he told his son that, and we have him. We have his whole testimony in our book, the UFO Roswell Ultimate Case Closed. Roswell Ultimate Cold Case Closed. We have his entire testimony in that book, and his conclusion was that Roswell was interdimensional. He called it interdimensional, and which tracks with what Steinhoff was saying. So when you have two high officers saying that to their sons, you have to give it some credence. It's not because some guy just sort of, I'm thinking it might be interdimensional. These were high level people involved in UFO crash retrieval research, and they're coming to that conclusion. So I had already seriously thought about that. That's what it was, and like I say, my mind is totally open on that.
Couldn't they already be here? I had one whistleblower saying that they have a base, base on the moon. They have a series of ships around Mars, and so couldn't they already be here? And this is just part of their, territory that they monitor, explore, or
PR campaign.
Kind of like Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
We already have bases in that quadrant. It's not like every time they stop, they have to travel across the galaxy. They're just traveling from the star.
Janet, what's interesting, Don Schmitt and I, we always get the question, A, where do we think they were from? And B, why do you think they were here? And we never discuss that. Don Schmitt and I have been a team since 1998, since May of 1998. We've been a team to continue what we call a proactive Roswell research. That means we're out there shaking the tree for information, for witnesses, for, to keep the case going, to see what we can find, rather than just sitting back and waiting for someone to say, oh, I know somebody, let me put you in touch with so-and-so. We're out there proactive, gumshoe type work. And, oh my goodness, I lost my train of thought.
There's artifacts out there scattered across the desert to be found.
Right. Plus, you're still looking. A lot of them are dead now because that was a long time ago. But I was talking to the guy from MUFON back when I was at Penn State University in 1989 to 93, and the professor emeritus at the university, I ended up going in his office. He was the recording secretary for MJ-12, supposedly, and that MUFON fellow was able to interview him about that whole involvement. Have you tracked down these the second, this is a MUFON fellow, so there might be a record of who was in charge of MUFON in State College, Pennsylvania in the 89 to 93. He had a whole book he was showing me that he was debating on publishing because, I forget the guy's name, Grant Cameron talks about, the head of Penn State University.
If you can get me his name, we certainly will track him down.
I don't know his name, but maybe MUFON knows who they had
Cameron
as their,
knows too.
who they had in charge of State College in the, it was like 89 to 93.
So it would be the MUFON State Section Director for 1989-90 in the Pennsylvania State College area.
State College, Pennsylvania, where Penn State University is.
Yes, yes.
He met at the university. He interviewed me because I said I had sightings, and he was so excited because he had this book he wrote about interacting with.
I will follow up on that. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know who it is right now off the top of my head, but my brother went to Penn State, and I know Penn State, and I'll find out who the MUFON State Section Director for 1989-90. Did you say?
Well, I was there. I was at Penn State. I lived in State College from 89 to 93. I headed up the Penn State UFO discussion group, and our big claim to fame was we had Linda Moulton Howe come up and do a presentation. We had 600 people, and back then, the CBS, NBC, ABC, all the networks showed up. So, and then I moved to Hawaii.
Oh, that's more than we ever had. No, I've done a few presentations with Linda Howe. Yes. So,
well, see, so novel back then. Nobody was doing it, right?
Right.
And we had to go up against. We had Phil Klaus's best buddy that worked as a professor at the university, and he would come in and debate with us. And I'm just this little, I'm little Janet, right? Like, who am I debating with Phil Klaus's right-hand man? So we did the best we could, but we were just amateurs. We were doing it for fun. And the university gave us a classroom, and we had about 35 people every week, every Thursday. It was like amazing.
Yeah. Well, the thing with MUFON, see, I was the state section director for Philadelphia and the 4 surrounding counties, but I couldn't get any help I had to investigate all the cases myself and write them up and put on the meetings, and everybody wanted to be entertained. Nobody wanted to do anything is what I ran into. And so I finally said, the problem here is that I'm mainly interested in Roswell, but most of the other people were interested in things like crop circles and abductions and all that sort of stuff, which I'm not interested in. That doesn't mean there's not something to them. It's just that I'm not interested in them. I'm a nuts and bolts guy. And Roswell, ever since I read the Roswell book, that's been my focus in the world of UFOs. It's been crash saucers, and the Roswell certainly it takes up. If you could see my office here, I have very little space left with all my papers and recordings and documents and stuff like that, and my office is out of control, I think. So,
yeah, we have a library like that. Ceiling to floor books. We keep going into other rooms with bookcases.
Yeah, I would like to mention a third sighting I had.
Okay, go ahead.
It was like 3 years ago. It went right over my house. It was a silent. This is like during 2 in the afternoon, bright day, and a triangle, perfect triangle, no markings, no sound, just went right over the house, and that's all it was. No marking. It was sort of a beige color, not totally white, but whitish beige. And I said, "What is that?" Because usually they would have some sort of marking on them, but it had no markings, totally silent. just glided right over my house. I'd say about up about 5,000 feet. So don't know
So
what
if there
that
was if there was a synchronistic monitor who had chosen you and could answer your question, why me? what would you get?
Yeah, I mean, I could almost reach out and touch it, but I don't know what that was, you know, and I've never seen anything like that before or since. So,
I think they like you.
Yeah, I do too.
They're telepathic. They know who's interested in them.
Yeah. I would like to mention we have three books that are current that Don Schmitt and I wrote.
Tell us about them.
Yes.
What are the latest books?
Yes, we have three current books. Believe it or not, there are 5th, 6th, and 7th books on Roswell.
You don't have a life besides this, though, right? This is all you do.
No, he's got kids.
Your wife has disowned you. But go ahead.
Yes, the book that came out last year is called UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Patterson, because, you know, when I give a talk, I'll say how many people in the audience ever heard of Area 51, and almost all the hands go up. Almost all the hands go up. And I say, well, how many of you have ever heard of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? And maybe one or two hands go up. Well, Wright-Patterson was the Area 51 before there was an Area 51.
Right.
That's where all of the Air Force intelligence was headquartered. That's where all of the development of new aircraft was done. And that's where they also had something called the Foreign Technology Division. Wow. And what that was during World War II, the foreign technology consisted of German Messerschmitts, Japanese Mitsubishis, and planes like that, where they would bring in captured aircraft and take them apart to see what made them tick, and to see what we could do to overcome them in battle, to outperform them in battle. So it was back engineering, it was called, taking them apart and seeing what made them tick. Well, when the Roswell crash occurred in 1947, where better to take the crash wreckage than a place that was already in that business at Wright-Patterson, the Foreign Technology Division. So that's why it went to Wright-Patterson. And they also had an advanced aeromedical facility to do the autopsies. They have the latest equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So in our book, UFO Secrets about Inside Wright-Patterson, we talk about Wright-Patterson's UFO history starting in 1947. And not only Roswell, but other crashes and other things that went on, the people who were involved, the paperclip Germans like Werner von Braun, they were heavily involved in this sort of research, because
how much did Truman know?
Truman had to know everything.
Yeah,
he had to know everything. But you know who the architect of the cover-up was? It wasn't Truman. Truman sought the advice, of course, the Air Force, or the Air Corps, it was called then. Mm-hmm. It was General. Oh my goodness, Hoyt S. Vandenberg, General Hoyt S. Vandenberg. He was afraid because just a few years earlier, in 1939 or 38, they had that famous radio show, War of the Worlds, where Orson Welles recreated, like in the form of a newscast, that aliens were landing in New Jersey, and the whole East Coast went into panic. Well, Vandenberg remembered that, and so the question was, do we want to break this story to the public, give this story to the public, or not? And he said absolutely not, because he was afraid of panic, not only on the East Coast, but in the country. And so that's why the cover-up was initiated.
Yeah, you know what I heard even earlier when Roosevelt had contact. So this story goes from Leach to some other people. He had contact with the aliens, and he said, "This is what we have to go public with it. This is wonderful." And they said, "No, wait, boss. Let's really think about this first." And so they hired Orson Welles to do H.G. Wells' story, and the panic was planned to impress the boss, and the boss said, "Boys, you were right. We got to keep this secret."
Who was this? Was this president?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, this was the advisors to Roosevelt. I think I read it in John Leach's book, Alien Genesis. But I'll get the reference.
Roosevelt died in 1945, so
he knew before. He already knew.
So they must be talking about I don't know, Cape Girardeau or something like that. I don't know. I don't. You know, the allegedly there was a UFO crash disc in the basement of the Capitol or something like that.
Yeah, something like
right.
that.
Yeah.
What
So I really haven't looked into that, but you know, I don't totally dismiss them out of hand, but they're interesting stories nevertheless.
Right.
But it was
the Vrils, you know,
the Vril gays that were helping Thompson.
Yeah, what about Tompkins? What about
Tompkins.
the Nazis and the Foo Fighters, and then the real girls with the real long hair, which was like their power, and there's a whole.
Well, the Foo Fighters were the Germans thought they were Allied weapons, and the Allies thought they were German weapons. But that was really, I guess, the first onset of UFOs. It wasn't as en masse as the 1947 wave, which started with the Kenneth Arnold sighting. That sort of ushered in the modern age of UFOs or flying saucers. But they really started during World War II with the Foo Fighters. And all we know about them is that we thought they were German. The Germans thought they were Allied with the British Americans. And that's basically all we know, because they seem to be mostly just lights and not craft, you know. So that's where it really started. And the question is, why did they all of a sudden appear in 1947? Well, all we can do is speculate, because we really don't know. But you speculate. Well, was it the detonation of the atomic bombs? Was that
right.
like a beacon? Was it World War II itself? We don't know. But all we do know is that starting on June 24th, 1947, with the Kenneth Arnold sighting, it has continued unabated since that time. You know, the Air Force getting out of the UFO business, which they never did, by the way, in 1969, did not stop UFOs being reported, you know. So it is interesting to speculate why all of a sudden did they appear like they did in 1947.
My sister said that my grandmother had a half brother who was a pilot in World War II, and he reported to my grandmother that he had seen the Foo Fighters. So I'm trying to track down that story. There might be a letter or something that she wrote.
Yeah.
We're trying to find it.
But that is interesting that they started appearing, but they were just balls of light, I believe. I don't recall anybody describing an actual craft. And then you had them flying over the U.S. Capitol in 1952, where I think craft were described by the fighter pilots that went up. And so it never abated. But the cover-up, the disavowing that there's anything to it started with Hoyt Vandenberg, one guy, because the first project that they initiated was in 1948 called Project Sign to investigate the UFOs up to that point in time and to come up with some conclusions. And the conclusion was they wrote a report called The Estimate of a Situation in 1948. And the conclusion was that they were something real and not something that was just an illusion. They were something real, and they described the craft and the speeds that they attained, and that there was really something going on. But Vandenberg didn't like the conclusion, so he had all copies of this report burned.
Wow.
And there's always rumors that, maybe one of the copies is floating around somewhere, but he had them burned, and that was the end of Project Sign. And they started this something called Project Grudge, where it was to debunk every UFO report that came their way, to debunk it. That's what the mandate for Project Grudge was. And that was so bad that they started, the CIA got involved, and they created Project Blue Book, which everybody knows about, which turned out to be a public relations outfit. Because all the real good sightings were going elsewhere. They were going elsewhere. They were not going to Project Blue Book, which was just a continuation, mostly a Project Grudge, of debunking flying saucer UFO reports. And it reached its climax, I think, with J. Allen Hynek when he declared that the swamp gas explanation for some sightings in the Dexter, Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1965-66. People were reporting real solid aircraft or UFOs, and he got off the plane. He said, well, they occurred, from what I understand, they occurred near swamps, and there's something called swamp gas, and that's all the reporters heard. There's swamp gas, and they all ran for the telephones and reported the story as swamp gas. And Hynek never lived it down. He never lived it down. He said, so.
Were you interviewed for the Time magazine 50th anniversary? I'm looking at the cover of the Roswell file. So the Roswell alien made the cover of Time, but it doesn't really look like the Roswell autopsy alien. They kind of made it more human looking, but big eyes.
You're absolutely right on that. Don Schmitt had it's a 3D model. We're talking about our book, Roswell, The Ultimate Cold Case Closed, which came out this year. Mm-hmm. Don is a forensic artist, and he did draw a picture of the craft. There's a picture of the craft in there that he drew, but he also had a 3D model made of the alien. And when I saw it, I called Don. I said, Don, the head is too small. The head is too small. And he said, well, the guy put it together, and in my opinion, the head was larger than what's being shown in that 3D model. But everything else, the features are right. It's just the head was larger than what you see there.
So you know the Time cover that I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
50th anniversary.
I'm sorry. You're talking about you're talking about the Time magazine?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes.
Roswell made big by making Time magazine in 1997. I have that, the original.
Yes, I have it too. Yes, yes, that is not a good representation. It's the head is it's too human looking, and the head is too small. But that's what went with it. It was the 50th anniversary year of the Roswell crash, and it made the cover of Time magazine. And,
so that had to be part of your work that brought it such notoriety, because
yes.
Were you interviewed for that?
No, but Don Schmitt was. In '97, Don Schmitt and I hadn't teamed up yet, but he and Randle had split. So they were each on their own, but I had not yet hooked up with Don Schmitt, which was 1998. So
okay.
they interviewed Don for that article they did, yes. But
so when you write a book, who does what part? How do you write a book, two of you together?
How to what?
How do you combine your efforts and write a book? Who does what part?
Oh,
How do you decide what you're doing?
we each have phases of the Roswell incident that each of us focus on, and we just divide up the chapters. I'll say, oh, I want to do that chapter, or he wants to do this chapter, and we come to an agreement as to who's going to do what chapters, because we think the chapters that each of us are most interested in.
Uh-huh.
So, in that book, Case Closed, like, we have a chapter on, it's called Touched by Roswell. It's about famous actors and actresses and political people, sports people that were somehow touched personally by the Roswell case. And, as we speak now, we are writing a full book on that. On that one chapter, we're expanding into an entire book, which will come out next year. Called
How were famous people touched by Roswell? Like, give me an example. Like
okay. For instance, myself, there was you have the National Football League, and one of the teams in the National Football League is the Philadelphia Eagles, and one of their star players was a defensive back named Tom Brookshire. He's in their Hall of Fame, and they retired his number. And it turns out he was born and raised in Roswell, New Mexico.
Oh.
And so when I found that out, I immediately called it, because I did some arithmetic. I said, okay, if he's this age now, that means back in 1947 he would have been a teenager. So he would have been 16 years old in 1947. So I called him up, and I got his answering machine. So I wanted to make sure he would call me back. So I said, hi, Tom, this is Tom Carey. I was a big fan of yours when you played for the Eagles. You were a great defensive back, but you couldn't cover number 23 from the Cleveland Browns, a guy named Ray Renfro. So I knew that would get his goat. And sure enough, I'm upstairs and the phone rings a little later, and the answering machine clicks on, and it says, listen, Carey, you don't know what you're talking about. I could too cover Ray Renfro. And so that got the conversation started. And so then I brought up Roswell, and sure enough, Tom Brookshire knew something about Roswell. He knew that the base had gone into lockdown, a full lockdown. His father had a service station right on Main Street in downtown Roswell, and the airmen from the base used to come in and get their cars gassed up, and they stopped doing that until the base reopened. He knew that the base had gone into lockdown, and when the base reopened, the guys from the base would not talk to him. They would just come in, get their gas. They wouldn't say a word anymore. They just wouldn't talk. And the other thing is, he happened to see and touch a piece of the memory metal, because some of his buddies on the football team, he went to Roswell High School, some of his football playing buddies came over and said, hey, Tommy, have you seen that funny piece of metal that Roy Tyner, who was a welder in town, who has? He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, he's got this piece of metal that's crazy. So I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Let's go over and visit. And so they went over to the welding shop around the corner of this Roy Tyner. And the group goes in there, and Tyner was welding away, and he puts his torch on. I said, what do you guys want? He said, we want to see that piece of metal you got. He said, get out of here. Get out of here. He said, nope, we're not going until we see that piece of metal. So Tyner walks over to his desk. You can imagine what a desk is like in a welding shop. It's all greasy. And he opens a drawer and he takes out something and puts it in his hand. And he's got his hand all wadded up into a fist. He says, okay, you ready for this? So he puts his right hand out with his fist shoulder high length out straight. He opens his hand, he opens his fist, and out floats this piece of metal. Instead of falling to the floor, it just floats there very, like a kite. It's just floating there, slowly falling down to the floor. And they said, wait a minute, do that again. So he did it again. And Tom Brookshire said, let me see that. And so Tom, he picked it up and he did the same thing. He said, where'd you get this? He says, well, I got a friend of mine, so-and-so, he got it from a spaceship crash north of town. He picked it up there. So, that was a witness who was a all-pro football player who actually touched some of the metal.
Wow.
From the crash.
There was a guy we were beside. We had a booth at one of the UFO Congress events. I forget what year, a couple of years ago, and he had some material, and we were able to hold it. He said that was from the craft.
Was this a military fellow, or?
Do you remember much about it?
No, I just remember this thing out of memory.
Yeah, he had some of it, and
returning foil.
Yeah, he had some of it, and then I had a guy that was like a whistleblower back in the what year was that? It was after I had been at the Penn State group, so I still had some contacts, and this guy, he sent me a letter, and it was wrapped in foil, and anyway, he had some story about he had to go into hiding, they were onto him, very dramatic, and I had that letter for years, and I'm thinking, he said, I have to hide this stuff. I'm thinking it might have been some of the foil, but I have no idea where that letter went to. That was from 90.
Did you say you had a fellow at one of your events that claimed to have a piece of the wreckage?
Yeah, he had little pieces. He had a whole display booth, and he was showing it there. He was there for 4 or 5 days.
And you let him get away?
Well, I didn't know if I believed them or not. I don't know. There's all kinds of people at a UFO conference,
Right, that's true.
Yeah, I don't know. So, no, I was busy selling my books, but I didn't go over and look at it until the last day when things got slow and people were packing up. I go, what is this? And they showed it to me, and that kind of looks like the foil that guy sent me back in 95. Wonder if I still have it. But, no, I didn't, he didn't let us crumble it or see if it floats. I don't know. He didn't let a lot of foil on it. But.
That's the one piece our case, lacks is a physical piece of physical evidence. That book, the Ultimate Cold Case, what it is, Janet and Sasha, it's a brief that we would present in a court of law.
Right.
Presenting our case to the judge or jury, versus what the Air Force could present. And we've been told by a number of lawyers that we would win. It would be a slam dunk in a court of law. Well,
get in touch with Alejandro Rojas, who does UFO Congress.
Yeah.
I think they're now doing it in Phoenix, and see if he has a list of his vendors. It wasn't, last year. It was a few years ago. We were going every year. The whole time they were at the Fountain Hills venue at the casino. But it was a guy that was right beside us. So maybe they have the fellow was sitting beside me.
Shiner's son have that you met in the Big Island have any the guy that wound up with the file full of artifacts.
Oh, Corso.
Corso's son, you talked to him when you were
I also hung out with Phil Corso Jr., and he had all of his dad's stuff or something,
right.
Which, of course, was reverse engineered. So he's probably still alive. He's in his 60s, and he lives in Florida. You might be able to track him down.
I interviewed him about 10 years ago, yeah. He said that they had, well, that's a long story. I personally don't want to talk about Corso, other than they had it's the only UFO book that I recall that ever made the top 10 of the New York Times bestseller list. I give them credit for that. They had the all-time best-selling UFO book the day after Roswell. And of course, I know Bill Burns too. I'd like to, if I could, mention the other book that we had that come out this year. And this is, we talked about the Roswell, the ultimate cold case closed. And we closed the case as a proactive case because everybody's dead. Everybody that we ever interviewed, they're all gone. And we figure most of the first-hand witnesses are all dead. So, and some of the children of the first-hand witnesses are dying off now too. So, that's why we called it Case Closed. But like I said, we have another book coming out next year. But the other book that came out this year, just a few months ago, is something different. It's a coffee table size book with over 400 photo images and art images. It's a picture book of the Roswell timeline from the day of the crash all the way up to the present. Everything Roswell related. We got all of the witnesses, and we got it in a timeline, and we put faces to names, and we put photographs of places to where the crash was. It's like I said, over 400 photos. And I have to tell you, the people that have bought it and even just looked at it, they use terms like fantastic, amazing. There's nothing that they've ever seen like this for a Roswell type book. So it's doing
your magnum opus.
Yeah. How did you get all the pictures? How did you get all these?
I took a lot of them. That's why I'm not in most of them, because I took them.
Oh, okay.
So we have a lot of pictures. Don has done some artwork, and it's the total timeline, sometimes minute by minute, certainly day by day, month by month, year by year, from the time of the crash all the way up to the present. And it's just the people who've commented on it said it's the best Roswell book they've ever read. And so you can buy our books. You can visit our website. You have a way to click on the image of the book, and it'll take you to Amazon. Our website is www.roswellinvestigator.com. That's www.roswellinvestigator, all one word, .com. That'll take you to our website. You'll see our books there. And you could just, all the ones that we have in print, you can order them there. They'll take you right to Amazon. And, or you can go to Amazon, on your own. But, that's how you can get the books. And we're very pleased with the reception that they've got. Well, we've always had good receptions, for our books, I have to tell you. So, we're very, very pleased about that. But I wanted to get that in. So
I'm glad you did. Now, since this is not really closed, it's ongoing. If people out there have, have witnesses they know of, or they are witnesses, can they still get in touch with you?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll give you most people have email.
Right.
My email address is T as in Tom, C as in Carey, Arey. So that's T Carey TCAREY, followed by the numerals 1947, which is like for the 1947 crash. So that's T Carey 1947 at AOL.com. And they can get an email to me that way. Or if they, I hate that, I don't know, I get some crank calls sometimes.
No, don't put your phone number. This is good. I don't know about you, but I get too many crank calls too.
Yes. I have this one that I've been getting for years. The guy, I assume it's a guy, he keeps changing the phone because I can put it on block, I can block it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So every time I block it, he finds another phone number that he can use. So,
Tom, one of the things that we taught in anti-harassment is keep a police whistle right next to the phone, and when the guy calls you again, just blow it, and you'll blow his eardrum out.
I think I'll try that.
Yeah.
He's been doing it for years. And you know what he does? He just like crackles some paper. He like crackles some cellophane. It goes. So,
oh my God. Horrible.
That's all he does is he crackles cellophane like it's some, I don't know what, but that's all he does. But he's been doing it for years. And I finally thought I had him beat when I got a cell that had a blocking device on it. But he keeps finding new outlets to call me.
Well, the music's going to come on any second. Tom, it's been a delight having you on.
Thanks.
We really enjoyed talking. You're a very good talker.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.